She pulled 11 frost-crusted wolves from the river in the winter of the long dark, and she never once counted the 12th body until it opened its eyes, and they were gold. 11 soldiers of House Varkane, drowning, armor dragging them under black water thick with ice, and one Alpha King no one in the Ashvale pack had seen alive in 6 years. If you're watching this from somewhere the river still freezes solid enough to walk on, comment your city below, and if you've ever been the one everyone underestimated in a room full of people who thought they knew your worth, hit like and subscribe before this story shows you exactly what that costs, the ones who look away first. 3 things are true before this story even begins, and none of them will stay buried. First, the 12th man does not wake as a man. He wakes convulsing, his back arched wrong, silver poison boiling black under the skin of his ribs, where an arrow still sits buried 2 inches deep, fletched in a blue that belongs to no pack banner Illyra has ever seen stitched on a fallen soldier. That arrow will not be pulled for another 11 days, and when it finally is, what comes out with it will unmake a conspiracy 7 years in the making. Second, Illyra Duskthorn was not always the woman scraping ice from her one good boot in a healer's hut on the edge of Ashvale territory. 7 years ago, she had a name that made pack elders stand straighter, and a father whose hands are the reason she can set a shattered femur blind, by feel alone, faster than any physician trained in the Royal College of Cauldren. Someone made sure the world forgot both of those facts, that someone is still walking free inside the very pack that exiled her. Third, somewhere in the frozen dark past the tree line, Commander Rurik Vane is telling his men that the Alpha King is dead, has been dead for 6 years, and that anyone who says otherwise is either a liar or a corpse waiting to happen. He will say those words again, louder, prettier, dressed up in mourning black, in front of the entire assembled pack before this story ends, and every single person in that crowd will remember exactly who spoke them first when the truth finally stands up and answers him. Ashvale territory sits at the northern edge of what used to be a kingdom whole, before the Sundering split it into 6 warring packs, and the crown of the Alpha King became a chair nobody would admit to wanting, and everybody was killing for. 7 winters ago, Illyra's father was the pack's chief physician, a position passed down through Duskthorn blood for 4 generations, and the pack elders trusted his hands with everything from birthing litters to setting the jaw of a beta who'd taken a boar's tusk through the cheek. Illyra grew up in that hut, breathing crushed yarrow and boiled willow bark, learning the 41 pressure points that stop a wolf from bleeding out before the moon can heal him, learning to read a fever by the color of sweat at the hairline. She was 11 when her father first let her stitch a wound alone. She was 14 when Commander Rurik Vane's father, then the pack's ranking general, accused her father of poisoning a rival heir during a border dispute that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with land. There was no trial. There was a fire, in the middle of a frozen night, and a hut that used to smell like yarrow smelled like smoke for 3 days after, and Illyra watched from the tree line, with her mother's hand crushing the bones of her own fingers together, too afraid to make a sound. They exiled what was left of the family to the outer hut, the one closest to the river, the one Omega wolves and broken things get sent to die quietly in. Her mother didn't survive the 2nd winter. Illyra did, on stubbornness and the 41 pressure points, and a knowledge of poison antidotes that the pack's official healers, trained in Cauldren's polished halls, had never bothered to learn, because border dispute medicine wasn't taught in a college that served nobles. For 7 years she has treated the pack's rejects in exchange for firewood and the occasional sack of grain. The elderly the official healer won't see, the mateless Omegas nobody claims, the children born with a limp or a stutter that marks them as lesser, in a pack that worships strength above almost everything. Rurik Vane, now commander of Ashvale's border guard at 29, passes her hut twice a week on patrol and has never once looked at her directly. His men call her the broken bird healer, quietly, the way you'd say something about furniture. She has stopped correcting them. Correcting them costs more than it's worth, and cold has taught her that some fights aren't worth the frostbite. What none of them know, what her father drilled into her in the 18 months before the fire, in secret, in the dead of night when her mother thought she was asleep, is that a Duskthorn physician doesn't only heal. A duskthorn physician is trained, blood and bone, in the old defensive forms the first pack healers used when they doubled as battlefield medics 4 centuries ago. Forms built to disable a grown wolf twice her size without breaking skin, because a healer who couldn't survive the men she treated didn't survive long enough to heal anyone. She has never used it. Not once in 7 years. She has folded herself so small and so harmless that even she sometimes forgets what her own hands are capable of, until the ice cracks under 11 drowning soldiers, and something ancient in her simply stands up and gets to work. The night it happens, the river ice groans, like something dying an hour before it actually breaks. Alira is 3 miles from her hut, checking snares, when she hears the crack. Not the ordinary settling sound ice makes, but a long, splitting shriek that means wait, a lot of it, going through all at once. She runs toward it before she's decided to, boots skidding on packed snow, breath tearing white behind her, and what she finds at the river bend stops her heart for 1 full second. 11 men in Varkane's silver and black armor, thrashing in black water, the current already dragging 2 of them under, and a 12th shape further out, larger, wrong-angled, sinking without a single sound. She doesn't think. She strips her outer coat, ties her father's old rescue rope, the one thing she kept from the fire, coiled under her cot for 7 years, waiting, apparently, for exactly this, around a birch trunk thick enough to hold, and goes in. The cold hits like a blade between the ribs. She pulls the nearest soldier by his collar, gets him to the rope, goes back, pulls another. Her hands stop feeling like hands somewhere around the 4th trip. By the 8th, she is moving on training alone. The 41 pressure points reduced to nothing, just raw grip and raw fury against water that wants to keep everyone it's holding. 9, 10, 11 soldiers coughing and vomiting river water onto the snowbank behind her, alive, and she is already turning back toward the 12th shape, when one of the rescued men grabs her ankle and screams the word, "Don't." She goes anyway. What she pulls out by the scruff of a torn, blood-black cloak is not, at first look, a man. 9 feet of fur and muscle gone slack, one hind leg bent at an angle no leg should bend, and lodged between 2 ribs on the left side, buried so deep only 2 inches of fletching show above the skin, an arrow shaft in a blue-gray color she has never once seen on a Varkane quiver, or an ashvale one, or any of the 6 packs colors she was raised to recognize on sight. The wound around it isn't bleeding red, it's weeping black, thin as ink, already crawling in thread-like lines up toward the beast's throat, and she knows that color. She learned that color from her father before she was 12. Silver poison, refined, the kind that doesn't just kill a wolf, it kills the shift, locks the body between forms, drowns a creature that was built to survive drowning. The beast's chest stutters, stops. Alira presses both palms flat over the ribs and does the thing she has not let herself do in 7 years. She stops being small, stops being careful, stops being the broken bird everyone walks past, and she starts counting compressions out loud into the freezing dark, daring whatever's left in that ruined body to come back and argue with her about it. It takes 19 minutes and 4 separate moments where she is certain she has lost him before the beast's chest lurches upward on its own, a sound tearing out of that vast, ruined body that is half grail and half scream, and the shift starts. Bones cracking backward into human architecture, fur receding into skin the color of old parchment gone gray with cold and poison. What's left, when it's done, is a man well over 6 feet, dark hair plastered to a jaw that could have been carved for a coin, and eyes that flutter open just long enough to fix on her face before rolling back. One glimpse, but enough. Gold. Not amber, not honey brown. Gold. The exact shade the old pack stories describe for exactly one bloodline, the one everyone in Ashvale has spent 6 years insisting was extinguished. She doesn't have time to think about what that means. The 9 soldiers still conscious enough to speak are already dragging themselves upright, and the one who grabbed her ankle, a scarred veteran named Bellamy Cross, second in command of whatever remains of this ruined escort, takes one look at the unconscious man's face and drops to his knees in the snow like his legs simply stopped working. "Sovereign," he says, and the word comes out cracked, disbelieving, reverent, in a way Alira has never heard anyone speak in Ashvale, where reverence got burned out of most people's vocabulary, the same winter it got burned out of hers. 6 other soldiers follow him down onto their knees around the unconscious king, and for one strange, suspended moment in the freezing dark, Illyra Duskthorn, broken bird, banished healer, nobody's concern for 7 years, is the only person standing. She doesn't kneel. She goes back to work, because kneeling doesn't stop poison, and neither does reverence, and she orders Bellamy Cross to help her carry his king before shock and cold finish what Silver started. He obeys her without question, which tells her more about who this stranger really is than any gold eyes could. They reach her hut an hour before dawn, the king's weight nearly buckling both her and Bellamy on the final stretch of frozen path, and she lays him on the same cot her father once used to save half of Ashvale's border guard, and she starts extracting silver poison from a body twice her size, with hands that have gone past cold into something numb and precise and unshakable. Because whoever this man is, whatever his eyes mean, the arrow in his ribs was fired by someone who knew exactly what they were aiming at, and someone who plans that carefully doesn't stop after one attempt. Commander Rurik Vane hears about the rescue by mid-morning, delivered by a breathless runner who has no idea what he's about to detonate. Vane's face does something complicated when the runner says the words Alpha King and alive in the same sentence, a flicker of something that might, in a lesser man, be called fear, gone so fast most wouldn't catch it. Illyra would have. Illyra learned to read faces the same winter she learned to read fevers, and if she'd been standing in that guard room she would have clocked it instantly. She isn't standing there, she's 3 miles away, packing poultices around a stranger's ribs, which is exactly why Vane has the next several hours to arrange his face into the appropriate shock and grief before he rides out personally to confirm the miracle. He arrives at her hut with 6 armed men at his back and an expression built for public consumption, solemn, moved, every inch the loyal commander overjoyed his king survived. He does not dismount. He looks past Illyra like she's part of the doorframe and asks Bellamy Cross, not her, whether the sovereign is stable. Bellamy, still shaken, still reverent, says the healer saved him, says it twice, gestures at Illyra like he's presenting evidence in a trial nobody asked for. Vane's eyes finally land on her then, and what's in them isn't gratitude, it's calculation, quick and cold, the same look her father described seeing on his own accuser's face the night before the fire. The broken bird healer, Vane says, and there's a ripple of quiet laughter from 2 of his men, the kind of laughter that's been aimed at her for 7 years and has long since stopped landing anywhere near her skin. Fragile little bird, pulled the Alpha King out of a frozen river with her bare hands. That's quite a story, healer, almost too good, he says it smiling. He says it in front of Bellamy Cross and 6 kneeling then standing soldiers who watched her do exactly that with their own eyes, and not one of them corrects him, because correcting Rurik Vane in his own uniform, on his own patrol, is not a habit that keeps a border guard alive in Ashvale. Illyra meets his eyes and says nothing at all, which unsettles him more than an argument would have. She has learned, in 7 years of being underestimated, that silence reads as either weakness or danger, and which one it is depends entirely on what happens next. And Rurik Vane, watching her go back inside without another word, without flinching, without offering him the fear he came here hunting for, does not look like a man who's decided yet which one he's looking at. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't going to let Rurik Vane's version of events stand. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because the moment this pack finds out what he's been hiding for 6 years is coming, and you're going to want to be here for it. The Alpha King wakes for the first time on the 3rd day, fever-broken, gold eyes open and lucid, and immediately fixed on Illyra's hands, as she changes the dressing over his ribs. He doesn't ask where he is. He asks, voice wrecked from disuse, who taught her to pack a wound like that? Tight enough to stop bleeding, loose enough to let the poison drainage continue working its way out, instead of sealing infection in. A technique that hasn't been taught outside battlefield medic training in over a generation. When she tells him her father did, he goes very still and says a name she hasn't heard spoken aloud by a stranger in 7 years. Ambrose Duskthorn. He says it like a man setting down a weight he's been carrying a long time. He knew her father. Not by reputation. Personally, from a border campaign 19 years ago where a young, unranked physician saved his life, the same way his daughter just saved it twice over. once from the river, and once from the silver eating through his bloodstream. His name, he tells her, once he trusts his own throat enough to say it clearly, is Cael Draven Ashvale, Alpha King of the Ashvale sovereignty, thought dead for 6 years after an ambush on the eastern border that killed the 11 guards who'd sworn to protect him. Except, he says, watching her face carefully now, it hadn't killed them either. It had done something else, something with silver-laced restraints, and a hidden holding cell 3 miles past the tree line that he'd only escaped 4 nights ago. Weak, half-shifted, running blind through forest, he barely recognized until the ice gave out under him, and a stranger's hands pulled him back from a second death he'd been fully expecting. 6 years, Elira repeats, and something in her chest, something she thought the fire had burned out of her permanently, goes cold and sharp and awake. 6 years is exactly how long her family has spent exiled, on a lie about a poisoning that never happened, orchestrated, she is beginning to understand, with the same clean, calculating clarity she uses to read a fever, by someone with both the access and the motive to erase an inconvenient physician and an inconvenient king in the very same winter. The man behind both erasures is not, as it turns out, Rurik Vane alone. Vane is muscle and ambition wearing a uniform, useful and cruel, but not, Cael explains, as strength returns to him over the following days, clever enough to have orchestrated a 6-year cover-up of a king's disappearance on his own. That architecture belongs to Lord Cassian Thorne, Ashvale's steward of the treasury, a human noble married into the Pack's outer council 2 decades ago for the mining rights his family controlled along the eastern ridge, rights that only became truly profitable once Cael Draven Ashvale, the one sovereign who'd refused Thorne's petitions to expand the mines into sacred Pack burial ground, was conveniently no longer around to keep refusing. Thorne is soft-spoken, precise, the kind of man who has never once raised his voice in council, and has therefore never once been suspected, and he is the one who commissioned the silver-tipped arrows, fletched in a blue-gray no-pack in the region claims, because Thorne's mercenaries aren't Pack. They're bought men from 3 territories over, paid in ore money, loyal to coin instead of blood. Elira listens to all of this while resetting a dislocated finger on a farmer's son at her work table, hands steady, face unreadable, filing every detail the way her father taught her to file symptoms, not with horror, but with precision, because precision is what turns a diagnosis into a cure. She recognizes Thorne's name. Her father treated his gout once, years before the fire, and mentioned once, offhand, over dinner, that Thorne had asked an unusual number of questions about which Pack elders trusted Ambrose Duskthorn's medical opinion above the official court healers. She was 12. She'd forgotten it entirely until this moment, and now it sits in her memory like a second arrowhead, fletched exactly the same blue-gray. Bellamy Cross becomes, over those same recovering days, something Elira hasn't had in 7 years, an ally who looks at her and sees a physician instead of a broken bird. He was the second in command of Cael's original border escort, the only one of the 11 who never stopped believing his king might still be alive, and he attaches himself to Elira's hut with a fierce, unglamorous loyalty, chopping her firewood, standing guard at her door without being asked, telling anyone who repeats Vane's fragile little bird line within his hearing exactly what he watched her do to save 11 drowning men with her bare hands in water that should have killed her too. Cael's protection of her starts subtle and becomes anything but, he insists. The first week he can stand unassisted, on sleeping across the threshold of her hut. Despite her insistence, she slept alone there for 7 winters without incident. He orders Bellamy to escort her on every supply trip into the outer settlement, over her protests that she's walked that path 1,000 times unarmed and unbothered. It's condescending in a way that would have irritated her more if she couldn't see, underneath it, something closer to terror, the particular terror of a man who watched himself almost die and cannot stomach the idea of the woman who pulled him back walking anywhere unguarded. She lets him have the escort. She does not let him have the argument that she needs it. The moment that breaks something open in him arrives on the 11th day, when 3 of Thorne's bought mercenaries corner her on the return path from the settlement, blue-gray fletching visible in the quivers on their backs. Message clear even before the first one draws steel. Cale isn't there. Bellamy is a half-mile back, distracted by a supply cart wheel stuck in ice. Elira is, for 90 seconds, entirely alone against 3 armed men who have been told, explicitly, that the healer who pulled the king from the river is now a liability someone once quietly removed. What happens in those 90 seconds is not what any of the 3 men expected. She doesn't run. She doesn't scream. Her father's 41 pressure points, dormant 7 years, wake up in her hands like they never slept at all. A strike to the first man's throat that drops him choking. A redirected blade that opens the second man's forearm to the bone with his own weapon. A knee that puts the third face first into packed snow, with his arm bent backward past the point his shoulder was built to bend. By the time Bellamy comes sprinting around the bend, weapon drawn, ready to defend her, all 3 mercenaries are down, and Elira is standing over them, breathing hard, hands steady, utterly unhistrionic, checking the unconscious one's pulse out of pure reflexive habit even as she does it. Bellamy stops dead, stares, and when Cale arrives minutes later, drawn by Bellamy's shout, gold eyes wild with a fear that hasn't fully drained out of him even once he sees her standing whole and unmarked over 3 subdued attackers, something in his face rearranges itself permanently. He has spent 11 days protecting a woman who, it turns out, was never the one who needed protecting. The deepest betrayal, when it surfaces, doesn't come from Vane or Thorn. It comes from Petra Duskthorn, Elira's own cousin, the last blood relative who stayed inside pack territory after the fire, while Elira and her mother were pushed to the outer hut, the one relative who visited twice a year, with just enough kindness to keep Elira believing family still meant something. It's Bellamy who finds the letter, tucked inside a supply crate Petra herself delivered that morning. Payment records, dated back 3 years, small sums from Lord Thorn's treasury office, in exchange for quiet, regular reports on exactly what the exiled healer's hut was treating, who visited, whether the old physician's daughter still practiced anything beyond herb poultices. Petra had been watching her for money since before Elira even knew the extent of what her father's real training included, feeding Thorn's steward office a slow drip of information for 3 years running, small enough each time to feel forgivable, adding up to a portrait detailed enough that when Cale Draven Ashvale washed up half dead in Elira's healing hands, Thorn's network already knew exactly whose door that miracle would happen behind. Elira reads the letter twice, standing very still in her own kitchen, and does not cry, does not shout, does not do any of the things Cale half-braces himself to comfort her through. What she does is fold the letter with the same precise, economical movements she uses to fold a bandage, set it in her apron pocket, and say, in a voice gone glacier flat, that she needs to speak with the pack elders before sundown. Cale, watching her, understands in that moment something he'll say aloud only much later, that her calm isn't the absence of fury, it's fury refined down to something surgical, and surgical is infinitely more dangerous than a scream. Rurik Vane, for his part, escalates the moment he learns 3 of Thorn's mercenaries were subdued by a healer he's spent 7 years calling fragile. He rides to Elira's hut himself that same afternoon, no escort this time, and delivers, in front of Cale and Bellamy both, the same line he said a dozen times before, sharper now, meant to wound before whatever's coming can land first. She's a fragile little bird who got lucky in the snow. Don't mistake luck for skill, Sovereign. I've watched this pack mistake a lot of broken things for miracles lately. Cale's jaw goes tight enough to crack. Elira says nothing at all, files the sentence away exactly the way she filed Thorn's name years ago, and waits, because she already knows precisely where and when that phrase is going to be handed back to him. The council convenes 3 days later in Ashvale's Great Hall, summoned formally by Cale himself for what's announced only as a matter concerning the Sovereign's return. Every elder, every ranking officer, Rurik Vane and Lord Cassian Thorn, both present in the front tier, and the entire pack packed shoulder to shoulder along the hall's stone galleries to witness their king's first public address in 6 years. Elira stands at the room's edge in her plain healer's clothes, exactly where the broken bird healer is expected to stand, and nobody in that crowd has any idea what's about to happen to the shape of the room. Cale speaks first about the ambush, the 6 years of captivity, the silver restraints, and then he calls Bellamy Cross forward to lay Petra's payment letters across the council table for every elder to read, watching Thorn's soft-spoken composure crack by degrees, as name after name, date after date, connects his treasury office to 6 years of buried conspiracy. Thorn tries denial. It lasts exactly as long as it takes Cale to produce the arrow itself, the one pulled from his own ribs, its blue-gray fletching matched publicly against a quiver, recovered from the 3 mercenaries Elira herself subdued 11 days prior. Mercenaries who, under formal questioning before the assembled elders, named Thorn's steward office as the paymaster, who hired them to remove a healer who'd started asking too many of the wrong questions. It's Vane who breaks fully when the elders turn toward him next, demanding to know how a commander patrolling that stretch of border for 6 years never once found a hidden holding cell 3 miles past the tree line. He shouts, he accuses. He calls Elira a liar, a manipulator, repeats fragile little bird one final desperate time, as though the words still carry the weight they used to. And it's the eldest council member, a centuries-respected wolf named Matron Vessa Ironwood, who rises slowly to her feet and answers him in a voice that carries to every corner of the silent hall. I watched that fragile little bird pull 3 of your commander's own guards from a frozen river last winter, then pull 3 armed mercenaries off their feet 11 days ago without drawing a blade. Perhaps, Commander, it is your judgment that has proven fragile, not hers. The hall erupts. Vane's own remaining allies step back from him in real time, physically distancing themselves as guilt by association becomes guilt by evidence. And Cale, gold eyes burning steady across the room, finally does what he's wanted to do since the day she pulled him out of that ice. He crosses the hall in front of every witness present, takes Elira's hand in both of his, and declares to the entire assembled pack that the woman they called broken is the reason their king still draws breath at all, and that from this day forward, anyone who raises a hand or a whisper against Elira Duskthorn raises it against their sovereign directly. The weeks that follow rearrange Ashvale territory down to its bones. Lord Cassian Thorn is stripped of his treasury seat within days, his mining contracts voided by council vote, his family's ridge holdings seized and returned to the sacred ground he tried to sell out from under a king he'd helped erase. He's exiled beyond the eastern border before the first spring thaw, escorted out by guards who don't bother hiding their disgust. Rurik Vane loses his commission the same week, demoted publicly before the same hall that watched him accused. His name struck from the border guard rolls entirely, and the last anyone hears of him, he's taken work as a common tracker 3 territories south, far from anywhere his old title still means anything. Petra Duskthorn is not banished. Elira, when asked what she wants done with her cousin, says only that Petra should live the rest of her life inside a pack that knows exactly what she did for money, which the elders agree is a harder sentence than exile would have been. Ambrose Duskthorn's name is formally restored within a month. 7 years of false accusation struck from every ledger that carried it, and the healer's hut, no longer edge, no longer exile, is rebuilt 3 times its size at Cale's order, staffed with physicians Elira herself selects. Because a sovereign who owes his life twice over to one woman's hands does not intend to let this pack mistake competence for weakness again. Cale declares Elira his Luna before the full council 2 months later, in a ceremony where Matron Vessa Ironwood places pale winter flowers in her hair, and when he speaks his vows, he says she's the only person in 6 years who looked at him half dead and drowning and decided he was worth saving, without knowing his name, his crown, or what it would cost her. Elira, who spent 7 years being small enough not to be noticed, stands before the entire pack and lets herself, finally, be seen completely. She thinks, watching Thorn's name become a cautionary tale elders tell their pups, that the people who spend the most energy deciding what you're worth are almost always the ones who never bothered to look. What would you have done, in her place, stayed small in a hut at the edge of everything, or gone into that frozen river not knowing what, or who, you were about to pull out? And 3 nights after the ceremony, when Bellamy Cross rides in from the eastern ridge white-faced and breathless, saying the old mining tunnels Thorn swore were empty, just turned up something wearing 6-year-old Ashvale armor that absolutely should not still be breathing. You already sat through 11 drowning soldiers, a hidden king, and a pack that finally saw her, so you already know exactly what kind of person stays for the next one. Subscribe now